Thank you, Susan. My name again is Lee Liming. I'm the Director of Professional Services at Globus at the University of Chicago. And the webinar today is about sharing data with Globus. And it's in particular aimed at the tools and the configurations that are available for storage providers that allow you to make sure that when you enable sharing on your systems, you are able to enforce the policies and requirements of the systems that you're administering. So this is mainly intended for storage providers, that is to say people who have storage, maybe a research computing center at a campus or at an access resource provider organization, and you're making it available to researchers for their use. Along the way, I'll also be describing how this works for researchers who are using your systems. And so if you are a researcher yourself and you came because you want to know more about how to share data with Globus, I hope that you'll also get some useful information out of this. But I did want to make the point up front that this presentation is intended for storage providers. And so you'll be seeing a bunch of system administrative sort of stuff towards the second half of the webinar. Is it not? There we go. So before I go any farther, I just want to remind everybody that Globus is software as a service and platform as a service. It's a data management system distinctly targeted at research organizations. And it's being used, it's been deployed on in a lot of university campuses, research laboratories, government agencies around the world. And it's being used by a lot of researchers to share a lot of data. I'm not going to say any more about this slide. There are a lot of big numbers on here. But if you are a storage provider who's providing your storage to researchers using Globus, you probably already know most of this stuff, and so I'm going to move over that. Before I go any farther, I also wanted to, right up front, show you the high-level scenario that we are aiming to make available for your storage systems. I hope this is one of the reasons why you are making your data storage available using Globus. The idea is that there is a researcher, probably somebody at your institution, who has data at their in their laboratory or the data that they've produced on their systems that they need to that they need to move somewhere in order to do some processing or analysis or introspection on. And so the first thing that they need to do is to get the data from wherever it was created, which might be somewhere at your institution, or it might be at a different institution that they're partnered with, onto your storage that is hopefully adjacent to your compute. So the first thing that they need to do is to transfer their data from wherever it started out to a Globus-enabled system, where it can be managed and where we can do fancier things with it. In this particular case, the example we're using is an access resource provider system. So think of a resource like NCSA's Delta or Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center's Bridges 2 or SDSC's Expanse. It could just as easily be a storage system at your research computing center on your campus. But the key thing is that it has a piece of software on it called Globus Connect. From that location, of course, the researcher can use the data on the compute facility, but then once they've done something with it, they may need to have more eyes on that data. And it may be people who don't already have accounts on that access resource or on your campus research storage. And so they need to share it with someone. And they can do that very easily in Globus using our web application by creating a share. And that's what this presentation is going to be about, sharing. And so I'm going to show you how it works. And I'm also going to show you how you can put limits on how it works in order to satisfy your security requirements for your own institution. Once they have created a share of the data on the compute facility where the data is available now, Globus will control access to the shared files for other people who are using Globus to access it. I need to be very clear here that Globus cannot make anything available that you've not already permitted on your system. So if this researcher does not have access to something on your system, they won't be able to share it either. So that you can only share things that you already have access to. Once they've done that, though, a collaborator who uses Globus somewhere else will be able to log into Globus and access the share that was shared with them by your researcher, the person at your institution. And they'll be able to access the data themselves, transfer it, upload or download files if they're permitted to by the researcher, and use the data in order to help the researcher out with their research. There are a whole host of other capabilities that Globus provides for automation, for application integration that I'm not going to go into today because this is about sharing and not about automation or application integration. But it is important for you to understand that all of what I just described is available to the researcher using a web browser. So they don't have to log in and use a command line tool or command line interface or use SSH. And it allows you to allows the researcher to use identities that they already have on their system. So the accounts that you've already given them or the accounts that their collaborators are already using on their systems can be used to access the data on your system. Very quickly, I want to remind you that in order for data on your system to be used using Globus or accessed using Globus, you need to install a piece of software called Globus Connect. Globus Connect comes in two different versions. There's a server version, which is intended for multi-user systems. So if you are the system administrator of a multi-user system, then you would install Globus Connect Server. And that would be how you make your system available to researchers to use. Researchers who need to make their systems available via Globus have the option of using Globus Connect Personal. Globus Connect Personal is available for Windows, for Macs, and for Linux systems. And it allows the researcher themselves to access data on their own resource using Globus, transfer it, and use Globus's features with their system. So again, to remind you, what Globus provides is fast and reliable data transfer, sharing, and data management services. It uses the storage that you already have on your system. So you're not adding storage. You're not getting cloud storage like Google Drive or Box or AWS S3. You're actually using your own storage that you already have on your systems. And it does this using software as a service. That means mostly, with the exception of Globus Connect, you don't have to install any software on your system in order to use these capabilities. And it also uses existing accounts that people already have been given. So you don't have to create accounts for people in order to do this either. Our overarching goal is to provide unified access to data across all the tiers and there are two aspects of this across all tiers that you provide on your systems to your researchers. So if you're in a research computing center and you're providing storage to researchers, you have the option of using any kind of storage, commercial cloud, HPC systems, local object store systems, tape archives, or other systems that may have not even been developed yet. And Globus will provide a unified interface for your researchers so that they don't have to necessarily know all the details of how you're provisioning the storage. They know that they can access it using Globus, and they're familiar with that interface, and they know what Globus can do, and they don't have to know any more about the ins and outs of how it works. From the researcher's perspective, there's also value. And what that specifically is that they probably have access to data storage or data on a host of different systems at their campus, at national facilities, at research laboratories that they partner with, and at other universities or other campuses. And Globus is a single interface that they can use to access all of that data storage and all of that data. And so the benefit to researchers is that they can have a single interface that they can use for accessing all the things that have been shared with them. And for the research, the system administrator at a computing facility, it gives you the flexibility to provide storage in a whole bunch of different ways without having to retrain your researchers in how to use another interface to access a different type of storage. Finally, I want to remind you that Globus has storage connectors. These are available to subscribing institutions, and there's a lot of them. So with an add-on to your subscription, you can add on access to Google Drive, to Google Cloud, to Azure Blob Storage, to iRods, Box, whatever types of storage you're providing to your researchers, there's probably a Globus connector that's available for it. And then this will allow you to provide the single Globus interface to a variety of different storage systems without making things complicated for your researchers. So if you see the storage that you're using on the screen, that means that it works with Globus and that you can provide your researchers with access to that storage using Globus. All right. Now that I've gone through some introductory material, I want to give you a scenario and walk you through how that would work. This is the researcher's perspective. Before we get to how you're going to administer it, I want to show you what your researcher is going to experience so that you understand why we're setting this up in the first place. Let's imagine that we have a project called the Zipper project. This is a gene expression project. The word zipper comes from enzymes that zip and unzip strands of DNA and RNA. And it has participants at the University of Chicago and at the University of Michigan. So the idea is that this is a cross-institutional project, and they're going to have to share a fair amount of data. Again, this is gene expressions, and so we're probably going to have data from gene sequencers, which comes on the order of terabytes at a time. Sometimes when you put together lots of sequences, you have hundreds of terabytes of data. The University of Chicago has in their budget for this project to allocate 100 terabytes of data storage for the Zipper project. And they're going to do it using Globus because it provides a nice interface for the researchers. So there is a U Chicago co-investigator, one of the lead PIs on the project. And what they're going to do is they're going to create what we call a guest collection and grant permissions to the University of Michigan lead researchers ID using their University of Michigan ID. In particular, they're going to grant access manager permissions to this collection so that the lead researcher at the University of Michigan can help with granting permissions to this to the people at the University of Michigan and anybody else who needs access to the data. So we rely on the University of Chicago co-investigator because the storage is at University of Chicago to set things up. And then we're going to allow people at the University of Michigan who also are PIs on the project to help out with the administration of it. So let's set this up. I'm going to switch out of slides and actually show you how we would do this. Again, this is the researcher's perspective. We're starting out with the assumption that the administrators at the University of Chicago have already created the Globus available storage. And I'm going to show you how that works. And then after we're done with that, I'll go and show you how you as a system administrator would set it up in order to make this experience possible for the researcher. So just to walk you through, I've already been given a project directory on UChicago's campus-wide research storage collection. So that's where I'll start. I'm going to create a guest collection and give the access manager role to my partner at the University of Michigan. And then the University of Michigan researcher will be able to go and add permissions for all of the students at both the University of Michigan and University of Chicago if necessary. So I'm going to switch out of slide mode and go to my browser. Here it is. Okay. And I'm going to log into Globus. So again, I'm the University of Chicago researcher. Helps that I actually have a University of Chicago account because that's where Globus is. I'm going to log in with my University of Chicago ID. I've already signed in earlier today, so I don't have to go through the username and password and multi-factor authentication. And now here I am in the familiar Globus web interface. So the first thing I have to do is find the storage that the administrators at University of Chicago gave me. It actually is right here in my recents. Campus-wide research storage. This is kind of the projects directory at University of Chicago. And you can see there's a bunch of projects here. And here, notice that they've already created a directory for me called Zipper. This is my project directory on the University of Chicago's campus storage. And if I look at it, I wouldn't be surprised if there's nothing there. Yeah, there's really nothing there. So this is just a brand new project. They just gave it to me. So I think one of the first things I'm going to do is create, I always do this when I have a new project, is create an incoming directory that'll will probably be the one place in here where people can maybe upload things to share them with the project if necessary. And everything else will basically be project space. So the first thing that the researcher does in order to make this space available to their colleagues is click on the Share button. Share is this little button over here on the right side of the screen. And it will allow me to add a guest collection. So a guest collection is what we call a share in Globus. And it allows people who don't have accounts on the UChicago system to do things with it if we permit them to do it. So I'm going to give the guest collection that I'm creating a name. We're going to call it Zipper Project Data at University of Chicago. And I could give it a nice description. I'm not going to bother typing that today. Not feeling too confident in my typing skills right now. And I can just, I think, yep, looking it over, I'm just going to create collection. And off it goes and creates a new guest collection called Zipper Project Data at the University of Chicago. And the first thing that it lets me do then is add permissions. So right now, I'm the only person who can access Zipper Project Data at University of Chicago because I haven't given anybody else any permissions. And so remember what I said, my goal today is not to give permission to everybody on the project. My goal is to give access manager permissions to my partner at the University of Michigan so that he or she can help me out and be essentially someone who could help me administer access to this project space. So the role that I'm going to give them is access manager, which allows them to view, add, and delete all access rules for the endpoint. And they'll also, of course, have read and write access to the collection itself. So I have to actually say who I want to give access manager to. There we go. So my alter ego is at the University of Michigan. Obviously, in reality, this would be somebody else, but it turns out that I have an account there. So I'm going to give access to this University of Michigan account called Ronald Limey and add role. So now people who have roles on the collection are my University of Chicago ego, who is the owner, and my University of Michigan alter ego, who is has an access manager role. Now, if I go to a totally different browser, go to Globus, I'm not logged in yet, so I'm going to have to log in. This time I'm going to log in as my University of Chicago identity. This is my partner at University of Michigan. It remembers me from the last time I used this browser, which is kind of nice. Now, when I look at things in Globus, I should be able to find that collection that we just created. It's called Zipper Project. Hello, Zipper Project Data at the University of Chicago. And I get there, and there's that incoming directory that the University of Chicago person created. And otherwise, I just see empty data. But now, because I've been given access manager privileges, I can actually set permissions on this. And so now my as somebody at the University of Michigan, I can actually give either user or group permissions, read only or read write, to directories within this collection, to people who are participating in the project, either at the University of Chicago or at the University of Michigan. I would do that by finding them, first of all. Let's say that I wanted to give this guy named Vas Vasiliadis, who, let's see, no, I don't want to give it to any of those Globus IDs. There we go. This is a University of Chicago, Vas Vasiliadis. That's the person I want. I could give him read-only access, and voila. So now he should show up here with, permissions, only read, not write. So now I've granted one of my colleagues on the Zipper project with permissions to the guest collection. So that's the researcher experience. That's what we are trying to enable for our researchers. So you can see it's pretty easy for researchers to do this. And that's the motivation for why we want to set things up to allow sharing, so that our researchers can do things for themselves. They don't have to come to us as storage administrators to set everything up for them and figure out how to do it and figure out how to do it securely. We want to make it so that they can self-service this stuff as much as possible. But that does beg the question then, what if I have access policies that matter to my institution? What if I have policies that need to, or restrictions that I need to have on how sharing can be used on my system? What are my options? So the good news is that Globus has very rich sharing policy settings. You can define sharing policies for each mapped collection on your Globus Connect server endpoint. So that allows you, if you need to create more than one map collection, to have different policies if you need to. The most important sharing policy in a map collection is whether sharing is enabled or disabled. That's an on-off switch. If it's enabled, then anybody who has access to that mapped collection, who you've configured to have access to the map collection, can share things with other people. But they can only share things that to which they already have access. So the basic rule is sharing allows somebody who already has access to something to share it with more people. But you can't share anything that you don't have access to yourself, obviously. So that's the on-off switch. Once it's on, you can then pare things down. You can add restrictions if you want to. You can restrict who can share. You can restrict what can be shared, what parts of the mapped collection can be shared. And now, within the last few months, we've added a new feature called domain restrictions, which allow you to restrict with whom things can be shared. So you can restrict who can share, and you can restrict who they can share with. And I'm going to talk about each of those three things in turn and give you a couple examples on the command line. Before I get any farther, I just want to remind you that you can always update collections in Globus on the command line using Globus Connect server collection update. And if you want to get all the options, you can type --help and it'll spit out all the things that you can do with your collection to update it. So once you've got a mapped collection on your system, you can always change it, reconfigure it, etc., by using the update command. It takes the form Globus Connect server collection update, and then you specify whatever options you want to change on it, and then you give a UUID. And the UUID is tied to each collection has a UUID, and you can find all the UUIDs with Globus Connect server collection list. It'll print out a table of UUIDs and the names of the collections on your system. So if you have a collection called Purdue Anvil, for example, and you want to update it with new policies, you would do Globus Connect server collection. You would do Globus Connect server collection list, find Purdue Anvil, find its UUID, and then paste that UUID in here with some additional options, and it would change the settings. The option that allows you to enable or disable guest collections is allow guest collections or no allow guest collections. So that's our quick and dirty on-off switch for sharing on a collection. All right, let's take a look at the first of the three things that you can restrict. who can share, who's allowed to share. You do this using any of these four options on your collection: sharing user allow or user deny, or POSIX sharing group allow or POSIX sharing group deny. Now, these last two only work on collections that are POSIX collections. So that means they have to be storage that's mounted on the system, and you can see it when you're logged into the system using Linux commands. There are different options for all the different storage connectors, POSIX being one of those storage connectors. But anyway, bottom line, you can limit sharing to specific users, or you can limit sharing to specific groups, or you can even, if you need to, allow everybody except certain individuals or everyone except a certain group to share in a particular collection. If you need to, for example, list 3 usernames, you would do that by giving this option 3 times, each time with a different username. So you'd have sharing user allow Alice, sharing user allow Bob, sharing user allow Joe. Okay. Obviously, as you can see, that's not going to go very far. Your command is going to get very, very long. So you'd probably want to create a group on your system, add Alex, Joe, and Bob to that group, and say POSIX sharing group allow and the name of the group. Okay. And again, you can have multiple groups that are permitted if you want to, or multiple groups that are denied. Either way. So very quickly, let me pop out of here, go to my command line, give you a couple examples of this. I'm logged into Connect server. I'm logged in to my Globus Connect server host system right now. And so I have the Globus Connect server command available to me. I'm logged in as an administrator. This Liming at uchicago.edu is an administrator. If I do collection, told you my typing wasn't good, collection list, it'll show you all the collections that are on my system. And you can see here the UUIDs that I was talking about and the display names. So here's our campus-wide research storage. And here is the UUID for it. So now if I do Globus collection show and that UUID, it'll show you all the options for that. And here they are. I'm just checking to see. Yep, that's what I thought. So guest collections are enabled. I've enabled that. And there aren't really any other significant options here that restrict things. So you can see why I was able to, why my researcher was able to create that guest collection and share it with somebody at University of Michigan, because there aren't any restrictions that prevent that from happening. If I wanted to change something, I would do, let's see, I would do update, and I would give an option. So let's go back to here. Let's see, sharing. I'm not going to do that. Yeah, I guess I am. I would do sharing user allow, only one person. Actually, I think it's Liming here. Now I've made it so that the only person who can create guest collections on this system is myself. And if I wanted to reverse that and take that only one person out, I believe I would change it to this. And now everybody again can create guest collections. Okay. All right. Moving on to move on to path restrictions, that is, what can be shared. This is a little bit different. Rather than specifying it directly on the command line, we have to create a policy file. So we would create a file. It's in JSON format, and these files look like this. They start out with the line data type, path restrictions, pound 1.0.0, and then they have a list of things. It can be none and then a list of directories, read and a list of directories, or read_write and a list of directories. And that's what this file looks like. And that basically defines the policy of who is allowed to, what paths are allowed to be shared. Where can you share things in this collection? And then you would use it in the Globus Connect server command. In this way, you would say sharing restriction paths, and you would give a file colon and the name of the file that you created. I don't know why it keeps doing that. So basically, this allows you to lock down parts of your system to not be shared. Or, like for example, in this case, this policy right here says you can, because it's / you can create guest collections anywhere in this mapped collection, but they're limited to read only. So you can share with anybody, but they're only going to have read access. Even if you want to give them read-write access, the system's not going to let them write to your system if they're coming in as a guest in the guest collection. It would only be read-only. So that's what a policy like that would look like. It would be read and then / and basically says you could create guest collections anywhere, but they're limited to read-only. Okay. For extra credit, you can look up in the Globus Connect Server 5.4 manual, there's also an option for creating user-specific sharing path policies. So you can combine a policy that limits, that is specific to a particular individual account on your system and specific paths that they can share. And it actually adds permissions for that particular individual. But I'm not going to go into that because it's more complicated than I want to get into today. Okay. So basically, again, you edit this file on your system, call it whatever you want, and then tell Globus Connect Server about it on the command line. The last example that I want to give is the new one, and it's very exciting. This allows you to restrict who things can be shared with. We create an authentication policy with a command. This is Globus Connect Server, but it's instead of being about collections, it's called auth policy. So Globus Connect Server auth policy create. We say what the policy is. We allow uchicago.edu identities or UMich identities. We give it a description, requires a University of Chicago or a University of Michigan identity, and then we give it a name, which is usually shorter, uchicago or UMich. And what Globus spits out for us is a UUID. We can then use that in another command, Globus Connect Server collection update. And then the option is guest auth policy ID and give it the ID that was spat out before and the UUID of the collection. Okay. And what that does then is it means that no matter who on earth the access managers of this collection share with, the only people who will actually be allowed to access it are people who come to it with a University of Chicago or a University of Michigan identity. Okay. So basically, the idea is you create these auth policies and then you use them as an option on your collection. Let me very quickly switch again to my command line where I will show you what that auth policy looks like because it's very nice. Auth policy help shows you all the things you can do. You can create auth policies, delete them, list them. This is very important because I actually have on my system already a couple auth policies that I've defined. One is either University of Chicago or a .gov identity. Another is a University of Chicago or a University of Michigan identity. So those are the auth policies that I've already created on the system. You can then show the details of any of them by putting in the ID here, or you can update an existing one with different options if you want to. Maybe a different description, maybe a different name, or maybe even different domains that are included or not. And then the last thing I wanted to do was show you really quickly what those policies could have in them. Included domains, you can exclude domains if you'd rather subtract things that add them. And there's a high assurance option. If you have a high assurance Globus subscription, you can say that this policy is needs to follow the high assurance rules. In other words, somebody has to actually authenticate with the identity. They can't just have it linked in their set of linked identities. They have to actually authenticate in order to access the collection. And then the last thing that I wanted to point out about this is that you can use wildcards if you want to in your include or your exclude. So you could say any, as I did here, any.gov. So let me show you that one. I'll show you what the .gov one looks like. And you'll see that I used a wildcard. There we go. Include domains uchicago.edu or star.gov. Okay. I actually used this in a collection. It's a different collection than the one I was using here. So I'm going to find it now. Zipper. It's on the same system, but I actually applied this this domain policy to it. Zipper project restricted to UChicago and UMich. So this is a collection that should not be available to anybody who's not at University of Chicago or University of Michigan. So even if the researcher decides that they want to share it with somebody else, the system's not going to let them. So it basically allows you as the administrator to take back a little bit of control. Notice here that the crafty researcher thought that he was going to share with somebody, Lee Liming at Globus-ID.org. Okay, this is an alternate Globus ID that I have. Notice that it's not a University of Chicago or a University of Michigan ID. So the researcher thought that they were going to give this person actually right access to the collection. Well, let's try it out. I'm going to go back to my other browser. I'm going to log out of my real University of Chicago identity and log in instead with this Lee Liming at Globus-ID.org character. And we'll see what happens. I need to use my password manager to get that because I hardly ever use this alternate identity. Let's see. Globus secondary. There we go. Okay, copy and paste. And now you'll see something kind of cool, which is that when I get into Globus, let's take a look first of all to make sure I know who I am. I've logged in as this Lee Liming at Globus-ID.org. I have no other identities linked. Okay, so this collection has supposedly been shared with me, right? You saw the access control rule that said it was shared with me. So I should be able to go here and access it, but no, because the administrator of the system at University of Chicago said you got to have a UChicago or a UMich identity, and in this case, I don't. What happens if I hit continue? It very helpfully offers for me to link an identity from University of Chicago or University of Michigan, any of the campuses at University of Michigan. And if I can do that, then it'll give me access to the collection. But if I can't get in. So that's how I would use that as a system administrator to make sure that even though I've given my researcher the ability to share, they can't share without some restrictions. So that was all I had to show today in this webinar. Have there been any? I don't see any questions in the chat. I hope what I have convinced you in this presentation is that there are a lot of levers and switches that a system administrator can use to control how sharing is available on their system, so that if you do have any special policies, you have the power to enforce them. So you can enable sharing on your system. And then when you do that, you can make sure that all of your requirements are satisfied. Here are some support resources. I want to make sure you all are aware of docs.globus.org. The Globus Connect Server version 5 manual, where all of the options that I explained to you are described, are here. And our technical support is available at support@globus.org. So if you have a question about how to use any of these features, you can just fire off an email to support@globus.org, and our excellent support staff will help you out with that. I also want to remind you that our annual conference, Globus World, is happening April 25th through 27th in Chicago and online. And so if you want to know more about Globus or want to meet people who are using Globus around the world, go ahead and visit globusworld.org to register either for in-person or online. And we hope to see you in April. Thank you very much.